Good evening, and thank you for joining us for the first of three conversations on the search for democracy in Ethiopia. My name is Mark Campbell. I'm a founder of Democracy House, which began a little more than 2 years ago. We're a multi-partisan movement that promotes respectful dialogue and engagement on democratic issues, rights, and responsibilities at home and abroad. Democracy House was conceived of in Toronto, the world's first 50-50 city, meaning that when you meet someone here, there's an even chance that they will not even have been born in Canada. One of the things I love about living here is that your friends, neighbors, and people you engage with on a daily basis can be from just about anywhere in the world. The opportunities to learn from those who have very different perspectives than our own is available if we engage. Last Canada Day, I took a walk in High Park with some neighbors, including Gizan Damisi, who I'd just met. With sparkling eyes indicating a beaming smile beneath his mask, he told us that on Canada Day 5 years ago, he had become a Canadian citizen and was so happy and grateful to be here. Learning that he's a journalist, writer, filmmaker, and radio host focused on human rights, we began speaking about Democracy House and our hopes of expanding globally. Gizan attended a conversation series Democracy House hosted in February. Inspired by that series, he approached me to ask if we might host a similar series for Ethiopia prior to the upcoming elections, which we understand have been postponed once more. Perhaps that's a good thing, as this provides more time to engage, understand, and encourage democratic values in Ethiopia. We will record this series of keynote addresses, which will be available for you to send to friends and family if you'd like. I'd now like to introduce Gizan Damisi, Executive Director of Bridge Entertainment, New Perspective, and the moderator of this series on the future of democracy in Ethiopia. Gizan, the floor is yours. Thank you.
A fair and free election and a vibrant constitution, of course, they will become a democratic society. The Ethiopian people proved this in 2005 election, which was rigged by the then autocratic and ethnically oriented government. I was a journalist and observer of that vibrant election, an election that gave hope to most, if not all Ethiopians, a glimmer of hope. It was unfortunate that the election was effectively overturned by the existing government, and that subsequently dissent voices were suppressed and oppressed up until the time when the current interim government came to power and opened the space, released political prisoners, and allowed opposition leaders abroad to return back home to Ethiopia. In my lifetime, I witnessed 5 national elections in Ethiopia, but all of them were fake and rigged. And was the most recent one 100% victory for the ruling party that claim made the election the laughing stock of the world? Ethiopia and Ethiopians so far have tried all kinds of government: monarchy, communist, dictatorship, military junta, and ethnic-based, but all of them have failed. The only system that has never been truly examined is the democratic. During the imperial time, it was believed and stated by the emperor that the people of Ethiopia were not ready to select their own leaders. So the emperor appointed candidates for so-called election on their behalf. But how about now? After I came to Canada, I learned that democracy is not something that comes from above, but from below. Unfortunately, for the last 50 years, Ethiopians have not had a chance to be a free society. I urge not just the Canadian government or any Western government to stand with Ethiopians and to require free and democratic elections, but the people of Canada. It is the people who are the source of political power in this part of the world. In my time in Canada, I have witnessed that the people of Canada are kind and free. They live democratically, and it is this value that I want to transfer and bridge to Ethiopia, my homeland. The people of Canada have always stood beside Ethiopians and others who suffer from tyrannies and authoritarian systems. I hope these same people will show support and urge that other people be able to enjoy the fruits of democracy as well. With this, I would like to introduce you tonight's keynote speaker, Jeremy Kinsman. Jeremy Kinsman, born in Montreal, was the Canadian Foreign Service for 40 years. The last 15 as our ambassador in Moscow, Rome, London, and Brussels, European Union. Before his appointment as ambassador, he had been minister at the Canadian Embassy in Washington and at the United Nations in New York. Since leaving public service in 2006, Jeremy has concurrently been diplomat in residence at Princeton University, his alma mater, Regents lecturer and resident international scholar at the University of California, Berkeley, and a distinguished visitor at Ryerson University in Toronto. From 2007 to 2017, he directed an international democracy support program that published a diplomat's handbook for democracy development support. He was also a member of Prime Minister Trudeau's Foreign Affairs Council. Jeremy is a frequent media contributor and appears regularly on CTV. He is a distinguished fellow of the Canadian International Council, for which he is currently organizing a year-long consultation between Canadian and German civil society on democracy, inclusive pluralism, human rights, defense, and cooperative multilateralism. Jeremy Kinsman, welcome and thank you for joining us in this important conversation. I will leave the floor to you.
Thank you. Well, I'm very humbly on this virtual floor, Gezan. I'm very honored to be sharing it with you, and I'm very moved by your report on what Ethiopia has gone through and is going through. I don't know Ethiopia well, but I've tried in the last few days to find out more, to get a deeper sense of its kind of human features and its aspirations. And indeed, I don't think I or anybody can do much more for you than help you to have the best for yourselves that you can get. You know, democracy can't be exported. That was a big mistake we made back in the 90s. It's got to be developed. It's got to be built. And the building block, Gezan, as you and I were discussing the other day, is civil society. What's civil society? This experience right now is civil society. You know, the YMHA or the YMCA is civil society. Parents Teachers Association, Little League Baseball, the sorts of things that people do together freely as kind of mini communities. That is what it needs to thrive. And as you explained to me, in Ethiopia, over the last many years, civil society has really been suppressed to the extent that it exists. The government tries to run it and to run people's affairs. Look, we're going through a tough time now. I think that differences between people, even in our own country, are so apparent now. Of course, the most obvious difference is between the sick and the well. But we've been talking now for years, ever since the financial crisis, particularly of 2008, of the differences in wealth that people have, the differences between the vulnerable and the very, very wealthy. You know, we've been talking this summer, last year, so much about Black Lives Matter and First Nations issues in Canada, about differences in identity, who's included and who feels excluded. And these differences seem increasingly to kind of control our discourse. Let me tell you that there's probably one difference that is very, very fundamental in the world. And that's the difference between people who are free and people who are not free. I'm going to tell you some grim statistics about that today. But I'm always reminded in this discussion about democracy and freedom, and I'm not talking about the freedom to be an anti-masker or an anti-vaxxer, or that isn't the kind of freedom I'm talking about. I'm talking about the basic things that are the foundations of people's lives. I think the greatest speech about this that was ever made was made by Franklin Roosevelt when the United States entered the Second World War in 1941. And he wanted people to understand what the sacrifices that were coming were for. And they were for, of course, defeating the enemy, that was apparent. But they were for something else. And he gave what is called the Four Freedoms speech. And the freedoms he was talking about are very simple, but they still deserve thought. There are two freedoms of and two freedoms from. The freedoms of are fundamental civil rights, freedom of speech and expression, and freedom of worship. But the freedom from that he was talking about, the two, are very fundamental. And we forget sometimes that it's freedom from want and freedom from fear. You know, a great anthropologist, Abraham Maslow, about that time in 1943, tried to articulate what he called the hierarchy of needs. The hierarchy of needs to be psychologically integrated, both as people, as individuals, and even as a society. And it's interesting to me, it always has been, that at the top of his list of needs are security and safety. And in that list of 5 needs is also the need for dignity or fairness, if you want. Freedom is an elusive concept. If people try to have freedom at the expense of security and safety, it won't be accepted. You know, in Tahrir Square in Cairo, at the beginning, at perhaps the high point of the Arab Spring 10 years ago, you didn't hear the word democracy among the people who were camped there in Tahrir Square. What you heard was the word fairness and dignity. And fairness and dignity, they infer treatment of people by other people and by the government of respect. They infer accountability for people who have office. They infer transparency. These are things which Ethiopians, I think, every poll, scholars do an awful lot of polling in countries you would find it difficult to believe polling could be done, but they do it. And they find that humans, no matter who they are, where they are, or their conditions, they want these same things. They want fairness. They want freedom, but they want freedom from fear. They want freedom from want. They want security. You know, things have not gone well for democracy in the last several years. The administration of Donald Trump was a complete disaster for democracy because American democracy lost its exemplary leadership value to others. But maybe let's hope that the Ethiopian election can show the beginning of a comeback. Because right now, where we are in terms of the freedom index is roughly, unfortunately, where we were in 1989, 1990. We have gone backwards. True liberal democracies right now, I'm sorry to give you the bad news, but only represent 14% of the people on this earth. Of course, that's partly because they're, you know, the huge populations of 1.4 billion of both China, which is certainly not a democracy, and India, which is to some extent a compromised democracy right now, affect the percentages. But the numbers of liberal democracies have gone down from 41 to 32. The number of autocracies now represent 68% of the people in the world. And these autocracies, by the way, have elections. As Gozan just said, they're apt to be phony elections, but people seek to legitimize themselves through elections, and they actually account for 87 states. Well, in those places, opposition is suppressed, the civil society is suppressed, voters are suppressed and intimidated, and people who take power very often, who get elected, find that in the course of exercising power, they begin to backslide. They begin to attack the media as being enemies of the people. They attack civil society. They polarize society by disrespecting, sometimes even dehumanizing their opponents. And they spread disinformation and false information. And they undermine the formal institutions of democracy that are meant to provide the checks and the balances to provide that accountability that is so important. Why did I get involved in this stuff? I was Canada's ambassador, and actually I was sent to Moscow as the ambassador to the Soviet Union, but by the time I got there, it was 14 different countries. So I was the ambassador, not just to Russia, but to an awful lot of countries that were initially pretending, most of them, to aspire to democracy. A few of them made it, and most of them didn't. And the one, of course, that was sort of heartbreaking for those of us who lived there in Russia was Russia itself. It wasn't because of the Russians. It wasn't because there's something inbuilt in them that disqualifies them from appreciating the value of democracy or knowing how to practice it. It is simply this, that democracy isn't something that you can download. It's not an app that you can simply extend to somebody. It has to be lived, it has to be grown, and it takes time. It's tough, and it is never perfect. As Isabel Allende, the great Chilean writer, said once, democracy is like husbands. There's always room for improvement, and that's true. But democracy is also very elusive. What it is behavioral, okay? It is not necessarily institutional. We can try to channel institutional history and capability, capacity, but what it takes really is behavior. The great legal scholar, Tom Carruthers, who's at Carnegie in New York, said once that it's not about courts, it's not about statutes, it's about what's in citizens' heads. And how does it get into citizens' heads? It gets there through practice over time. When I was in Moscow, I had a conversation with a man I got to know because my wife was a Czech political refugee. And she introduced him to me when I was political director at our foreign ministry way back 30 years ago, after Václav Havel had become the president of a newly free Czechoslovakia. And when he came to Russia, I would see him. And at one time he came in 1995, and he said to me, he asked me rather, I guess sarcastically, he said, well, how's your democracy coming? How's this Russian democracy coming? And I said, well, you know, they're working, it's hard, it's a tough slog, but they're working at it. And he said, oh yeah, well, give them 60 years, 60 years. I thought that was very harsh, too pessimistic. I later found out that what he was talking about was something that came from a writer called Ralph Dahrendorf, that when a new government of the kind that Ethiopia has, takes power and attempts a democracy, it takes about 6 months to kind of get its mission articulated and get it right. And it takes about 6 years to build the institutions and to build the economic practices that go along with that. But it can take 60 years for citizens' heads to catch up and for their behavior to change. It's tough. There's a big learning curve. And how does the learning curve get accelerated? It gets accelerated through civil society. I'll tell you one more story, one more anecdote. I was in Cuba about, I guess, 8 years ago on a writing project. I was writing Cuba up actually as a case study for our book. And I was under the radar writing about Cuba for the New York Times. And I got a meeting, a very cherished meeting, with the great Cardinal Ortega of Cardinal of Cuba. And he told me there in his palace, though the microphones were on and stuff, he let me know he knew what I was after. And he said, I want you to go to a parish project I have. And the government of Cuba, Raul Castro, had been rather more generous, the Catholic Church and his older brother Fidel, had asked Cardinal Ortega, because of the overload of daycare centers in Cuban social services, if the church couldn't perhaps help out and run, enable these young, often single women to have daycare centers in parish precincts. And so I went to one of these, and I saw immediately what he was talking about. I saw young women, barely girls, really, 19, 20 years old, young mothers. And they were, you know what they were doing? For the first time in their lives, in their whole lives, they were together running something of great consequence to their lives. They were in charge of something about their lives. And that is called agency. They had agency. And what democracy needs is for citizens to feel that they have agency over their own lives and can do the right thing for themselves and for others and for society. And what they learn in that experience in civil society is they learn how to compromise. The great problem with the Arab Spring in Tahrir Square, those good people in Tahrir Square, was that the so-called reformers, they couldn't agree among themselves on what to do other than getting power, getting Mubarak out of power. You know, it's said that the easy part of revolution is getting rid of the dictator. The tough part is what starts the morning afterward. What is necessary and what can we do? We can't export our democracy, but we can help the Ethiopians perhaps learn a little bit of what we do, that they can adapt, because you can't imitate somebody else if you're going to be authentic in your own country. We can do that. We can provide funds. Because of this, I wrote my friend who's our ambassador in Ethiopia, and I said, tell me something you've heard from Ethiopians. And he told me what a minister said to him the other day. He said, don't tell us, don't preach to us about democracy. Give us the tools. Help us to get the tools to have it. And that's what I think we can do. I think democracies together have to exercise solidarity. I'm not looking for any new Cold Wars against other countries, but I am looking for consistency among democracies in calling out violations of human rights. Human rights, and I'm talking about human civil rights, those are the building blocks. Those are fundamentally necessary to democracy. And we must be resolute about that. The difference between human rights and trying to export or promote democracy is that human rights can be litigated. Human rights are things that are in covenants that almost all countries in the world have signed on to, though far too many only pay lip service to them. And so that is very, very necessary. But every country's trajectory here is going to be different. No two countries are alike. Countries have human features. They might have federal features. Ethiopia has huge ethnic differences that is, to some extent, can be problematic. We have them in Canada too. And our democracy, the most fundamental feature of it is that it's inclusive. And my only advice to them is theirs has to be inclusive as well. But you Canadians, we do have a responsibility, because the best way we can help is not our government to Ethiopian people. That's resisted in some countries. It is you to Ethiopian people. It's civil society to civil society. If I could change what we do in Canada in one way, that would be very important. I would insist that at least a third of our development assistance budget, some of which goes to the sort of features of society that build democracy, I would insist that a third of it be administered by our civil society directly to their civil society. So it's civil society to civil society. And it doesn't have to be political things. It can be normal, mundane things: running your city, running your schools, running your health system, running your courts, making things work, building confidence that the Democrats know what to do. Because what happened in Russia was that the Democrats wanted to do it, but they were coming from another place altogether and they didn't know how. And let me tell you, we didn't know how either. And we don't know how Ethiopia should develop. That's up to Ethiopians. But we can at least give those Ethiopians the tools, the support, and the solidarity from start to finish, so that their election isn't again another election of somebody who says he's a Democrat, but once he has power, finds that he has to subtract the small amounts of democratic space that have been recently obtained. So I hope this is, I don't know if it's wisdom. I can tell you it's experience over many years and innumerable workshops and other what'll I say, sites of people's genuine effort to have what everybody wants. It's not democracy. You know, Ethiopia isn't going to be Ontario. Ontario isn't going to be Taiwan. I mean, we're different countries, but we share same basic human values. So I congratulate Democracy House for your, first of all, your very existence, and I wish you luck. And I hope you grow, because you will grow if the way you communicate and help others grows. So I wish you Godspeed. And I'm going to say, Gozan, I've learned from you, and this is all about mutual learning. It's not about one sort of type of society teaching another. We got to learn together, and we'll learn as much from you as you'll learn from us. And that's starting for me with meeting you just in the last few days. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jeremy, for this wonderful insight and keynote speech. I hope it will open up the debate and the conversation for all our participants. And you know, Ethiopia is, if I want to add something about Ethiopia, it's a very unique country historically in the continent of Africa. As you say, it's a very diverse country with 80 language groups, but never experienced colonialism. So I don't know what caused that. I mean, historically, this is a source of pride for the people of Ethiopia. But unfortunately, in Ethiopia, we don't we can't establish democratic, whatever, you know, fair system or institution so far. but we stay a free country in the continent of Africa. So this is an ongoing debate and conversation among Ethiopians and among Ethiopian friends. That's what we are trying to do today. We are trying to explore and we are trying to learn from other societies, other countries who experienced better democratic system. So now I open the floor to the participants and maybe to Mark or my friends can add something.
Hi, Gazan.
Yes, hello.
And Jeremy. Thank you so much. That was very enlightening and very inspiring, Jeremy. Greatly appreciate that. And the question that comes to mind, we have a couple questions coming in, but the first question that comes to mind is, Gazan, can you tell us about what action is going on at the grassroots level, which is what Jeremy mentioned was so important, to promote education for youth and school age children to understand democracy? Are there any civil or political science programs available to students in Ethiopia?
In Ethiopia, my experience is, from 5 years back. When I was there, there was an ethics education in the school system. But unfortunately, the education system is highly politicized and highly manipulated by the ideology of the ruling party or the government, the current government in power. So, which is a very unfortunate thing. So, during the military junta time, I mean, during the communist time, we used to have communism, about socialism, the ideological ethics, that's highly influenced by the Zen ideology. And now it's highly ethnic-based education curriculum. So the kids in the school system don't have the right understanding of what democracy is and what human right is and what a free society is and what a free thinking looks like. So it's manipulated. But as a civil society, there are some groups who try to encourage and try to start, this kind of activities here and there. For instance, I and my friends try to establish PEN Ethiopia. It's an international NGO working for human rights and literature. And the first thing we did in 2012 was to start a reading program in the elementary schools in Addis Ababa, which is the capital city of Ethiopia. And we try to encourage students to think freely and to read and to examine what's going on around them and in other parts of the world, believing that that is the foundation for a free society and a free thinking. But unfortunately, because of the draconian law, which was in place after the 2005 election, civil societies and medias were not allowed to teach about rights. So we were finally closed down by the government. So there are different starts here and there, but there is no continuity, or it doesn't sustain.
Thank you for that. And Jeremy, one of the things I've heard you speak about previously is that we can export the tools to assist countries in their building a democracy, and education is, of course, a huge part of this. You had mentioned that trade organizations and that those are very crucial. You had also mentioned, though, that we all have human rights understanding, and those are litigatable. They can be litigated, but litigatable. I don't think that's a good word. Litigated, but when it comes to forming unions and guilds and things like that, that's kind of the step that hopefully, would you think that should be available after school, after education, for a country like Ethiopia that's trying to emerge into a democracy, especially since you said it takes 6 years? Is that something that you would recommend? You're muted, sorry, Jeremy. Please unmute.
Thank you. Now I should be unmuted, right? Yeah. It should be. It was old Václav Havel who had the 6 years idea, but maybe he wasn't so wrong. The one thing was very revealing about the Arab Spring. One country did it. One country succeeded. It was Tunisia. It's still tough. I mean, our democracy is tough. Look at American democracy. And I'll just say to Ghazan, your question of him about to what extent are what Americans call civics taught in school. I was the member of a council in Washington that ran our project. I was there talking about this stuff for a decade. And during that time, the teaching of civics in the United States in high schools virtually disappeared. And it disappeared because school boards couldn't agree on the role of government and what was the correct thing to say. That wouldn't happen in Canada, but it was simply revealing. I think that some of the problems in America today is because there is no common kind of assumption about civics. But anyway, you asked me about something else, and I would say that Tunisia succeeded because, despite the fact it had kind of semi-benign, if kleptocratic autocracies, monarchies for many decades, it had always had exactly what you're talking about: trade unions. It was one of the Muslim countries in which women were most resolutely independent, and that it had civil society. It had active and independent bar associations and teachers associations and professional associations that enabled people in that experience to learn the value of compromise and to learn how to manage things. In apartheid South Africa, when the Black South Africans weren't allowed by the regime to organize themselves in anything, they only had two things that were permitted. They could organize their own funerals, which is, for somebody my age, if you remember those times, those funerals became enormous political events because they were the only ones that were permitted. And they could organize and have their own football clubs. And it's in those football clubs that the anti-apartheid ANC movement was really so enormously bolstered, because it's there that people got together as equals, as peers, and decided their own things and learned how to create a program, how to compromise to make that program happen. So that's the value of civil society. We can only help to some extent. We can encourage and connect to those organizations and support them and make sure they prosper. I mean, it's not up to us to influence them. Even financing is suspect in many countries. But we can relate our equivalent of the football clubs and their football clubs, or our equivalent of trades unions and theirs. Working people have things in common, no matter what they're working at. They have the same expectations. They have the same needs. They have the same obligations to their family to earn a living. They have the same need for meritocracy at work, for fairness. These are things that we can inculcate, you know, and that's, I don't know if it's a total answer to your question, but I think we have to create those bridges. They're terribly important to us as much as to them.
Thank you for that, Jeremy. That's very much fascinating ideas, and so many ideas about how we could move forward with this. And speaking of bridges, Kazan and his work with Bridge Entertainment, that his news organization here, he is all about building bridges.